I can remember as a child reading or looking at the comic strips on the kitchen floor. One of those was Buck Rogers, and Buck Rogers was, of course, this man of the future who was riding a spaceship into tomorrow. And so surely at a very young age, though science fiction reduced to comics probably had some formative influence. But there were other things as well. I can remember getting very serious at a very young age, 8, 10 years old, reading the reports from Barcelona, or the Ebro, of the Spanish Civil War, and following that, and knowing somehow that the outcome of that meant something for the world and even for me. And I was formed again, further formed, of course, as everybody in my generation was, by World War II. All of that gave me I think, a special interest in politics and in the relationship of science and technology to that. Another very interesting formative influence were the movies. I grew up in an era before Hollywood had discovered the anti-hero, and they were indeed heroes. And I can remember seeing movies which made heroes of great scientists. Louis Pasteur, Edison, and so on. So science and the future very early on came to mean something to me, although I have never been a scientist, I have never been a technologist, I am not very good at mathematics and not very good at chemistry and those things, but I did have the wit at university to study the history of technology rather than to the technology itself. And of course the work that I've done ever since, jointly with my wife once I met her, has been focused on the impact of society on technology, technology on society, and trying always to relate all of this to every aspect of life, family life, work, religion, rather than taking the point of view of a very narrow specialist.
Alvin Toffler sorprende al mundo cada vez que publica un nuevo libro. Ahora se encuentra en Londres promoviendo el último, cuyo título es War and Anti-War, Guerra y Antiguerra. Toffler es el futurólogo norteamericano que desde hace años viene advirtiendo al mundo los cambios que pueden suceder en las sociedades de mayor avance tecnológico y económico. Alvin Toffler, can a country like Mexico make a move from economy in development to an economy already developed?
Well, we have to remember that what is meant by developed economy in today's world is already a backward economy. All of the development theory, all of the economic strategies for development that we've developed ever since the end of World War II were intended to take an agrarian country, a first-wave country, and help it become a second-wave country, or what we would call an assembly line industrial country. But industrial countries are already backward. The new economy that you see in the United States, Japan, Singapore, Southeast Asia, Europe, is not any longer an industrial economy. It's not what we used to call developed. So to be modern is to be backward. We are postmodern. We are post-industrial. We are no longer second wave. So the question that's frequently asked, Heidi and myself, is can a country go from first wave agriculture to third wave economy without going through all the intermediate steps of industrialization? And it would be glib or foolish to say, that it's easy. Sure, we can do that. But there are certain things that can be done. For example, what country has the most cellular telephones?
United States?
China. China has the most cellular telephones, and the reason is
in Mexico. I see everybody.
Everybody has them, yeah. And what that is a more advanced communication system without going through the previous communication systems, because you don't have to dig holes and bury copper wires to communicate. So you can skip that stage that all the industrial countries went through. And there are many such examples of technological leaps that are possible. The leap that is not possible in a very short time, and maybe will become possible, is the leap in education. A country whose people are not educated cannot take advantage of the third wave. And if we look at, and when I speak of education, I'm not just talking of rudimentary literacy. I mean, there's more than that. In fact, I would love to see Mexico say, okay, if we're going to become a truly advanced society based on an advanced economy, we should have the most advanced education in the world. What does that mean? It means that it is not necessarily designed like a factory. It means that our kids have to learn. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of world will the kids be living in 10, 20, 30 years from now? Now, nobody knows the future. I don't know the future. Nobody really knows the future. But we can anticipate certain things, and we can certainly assume that certain things will not be there, and take those into account. I think that that education systems everywhere should be completely reconceptualized from ground zero. Where should education take place? Should it be in a school? Well, maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it should be in the home. Maybe it should be partly in the home and partly in the community with the children doing community service. Maybe it should be partly within a school, but only for social or athletic activities. What is the role of the parent? Well, we know that, again, it depends on what country and what form of development. In Mexico, this is probably not true as yet. But it's certainly not true, I would imagine, in Chiapas. But if you think about education as we created it, the mass education system in Europe, the United States, and the industrial countries, it was based on a certain assumption. The assumption was that parents were uneducated and that the most educated person in the village would be the teacher. That meant the person who maybe had traveled 25 miles to a big city once in their life. That, and the person who could read a little bit, that person would be the teacher. And we respected the teacher. Now, many parents are better educated than the teachers they give their children to. This is true, it's certainly true in the United States.
Everywhere.
I think it's true everywhere. So the fundamental assumptions on which we built the education systems of the world have to be completely re-examined with a fresh mind. There are technologies, they're very expensive. They are not going to be instantly available to every Mexican family because Mexico is still a poor country. But there are technologies that can help transform education. There is no solution to the world's education crisis unless we somehow combine the computer and the television set and combine education and media. These two things have to come together in some new, unimagined as yet, integration. And I think that this is a place where it's possible for some of the poor countries to invent, and there's a way in which it is even possible to imagine leaping ahead of the rich countries. minus perhaps the expense of technology. The other question that we're always asked in this connection is, well, if we become third wave, can we stay Mexican? Or can we stay Chinese? And what Heidi and I say in response to the questions like that are, you can remain unique. You will be a Mexican of the future, but not the same as a Mexican of the past. And your culture...
But past could be kept as well.
I don't believe that the past... I believe parts of it, pieces of it can be.
The tradition, the cultural tradition?
Some, but I think not much. And I'll tell you...
In my country, it has been very strong.
I know this, not just your country. But let me tell you why I think our cultures are going to explode and new ones are going to form. Now, one reason for that is that the sky is going to be completely populated with satellites. In order to receive the signals from those satellites, it'll only be necessary to have a dish that big. They will have a tiny little electronic component in the middle. It will be possible in totalitarian societies to hide it under your coat and come in with it. Governments will not be able to control that. And what's going to come down from the heavens are going to be, Mexicans are going to be receiving television programs from Nigeria, from Fiji, from Thailand, from Indonesia, from Mali, from South Africa, from Canada, from all over the world. Ideas and elements of culture bombarding Mexico and the United States and every other country. Fragments of culture. Shrapnel, cultural shrapnel, hitting the culture and arriving automatically translated into the local language and maybe even the local dialect. Now, that will create totally new kinds of configurative cultures. We will, out of those elements, build new cultures. Each society will be able to, out of all of these elements, make a unique selection so that its choice may be different from the next country's choice. But the people in those countries and in our children are not going to be the people of the past. They're going to be the people of the future. And unless we anticipate that, we're going to politically tie ourselves into knots. We're going to be repeating old slogans. We're going to be looking for inappropriate solutions to problems that we don't yet recognize.
There is no future without past, and the future becomes present.
And I think, the future is indeed the present. I would say that my wife and I, Heidi and I, are futurists, but in all of our books you'll find history. Because we think that one of the most important things people can do to cope with all this change is to see themselves as from a distance, and to see themselves in a time, in the stream of time, the river of time, so that you recognize that there is a past and you recognize that there is a future and that you are over here. And we often make a joke about the cultural differences. We're shooting this in London. I'm always astonished. I went to a bookstore in London this afternoon. I can't count the times. And on London bookshelves, you will find enormous libraries of books on the past. The history of the British Railroad, Victorian gardens, the great age of Elizabeth. They love it. They are great at it.
They live out of that.
It is terrific, but it's past-oriented. When I go to a bookstore in Tokyo, it's exactly the opposite. The future of transportation, the future of health, the future of urban affairs, the future of this, the future of that. In America, no past, no future. Now, everything is this. Remember, Pepsi used to have a slogan. Pepsi-Cola had a slogan, the now generation. And indeed, I think that that's true.
That's scary.
That is scary, and I don't think it's necessarily healthy.
No.
So we think our function as writers, as futurists, as thinkers, is to try to introduce temporal perspective, the perspective of time past and time future, into the lives of our readers. And
I want you very much to tell us about, how do they relate the global village and the local village?
Well, what I've just said describes the global impact of communication, but at the same time, I believe that what we're going to see in the future in many ways will resemble the past in that it will be possible to live in a community. I mean, if you look at the United States, one of the key characteristics of the United States that has enormous implications for everybody is mobility. We're constantly moving. My wife and I lived in probably, well, between 17 and 25 different places before we were 35. That's not even a totally uncommon experience. It may be a little more exaggerated, but Americans are constantly moving. That was made necessary by big companies who would say to their executives, well, we need you in Detroit, or we need you in Salt Lake City. In fact, the joke was that IBM meant I've been moved. Now, what has happened is that with the new technologies, more and more people, millions upon millions of people, are working at home. And the home is becoming with laptops. This is happening in southern India. It's happening all over America. I had a great pleasure recently reading a front page article in the New York Times that said, people are working at home by the millions. And I laughed because there had been on the exact same location on page 1 of the New York Times a few years earlier an article making fun of me for suggesting that this might in fact happen. It was called visionary, you know.
Oh, you see,
but well, I know we're not visionary. We try to study what is actually happening. What is empirically what is going on?
Are you surprised when something you said would happen happens?
We're not surprised, but it certainly it produces a certain feeling, a certain. I said, for example, much of what we're reading now about birth technologies, about women who can bear babies at age 59, about transplanting eggs, about the biological revolution. It's all in Future Shock. 1970, working at home. After the earthquake in Los Angeles, work at home became an official policy practically. It was all in the third wave, 1980. And Chiapas was in La Tercera Ola, only it wasn't called Chiapas.
How do you think the power blocks will be shaped during the 21st century?
Yeah, that is the fundamental change that we describe in our new book, War and Anti-War. That's the most important point of the whole book, I think. And that is this. If we look at the distribution of power on the planet, the most important division was not between the Soviets and the United States. It was between the agrarian countries and the industrial countries. Ever since the rise of industrialization began in Western Europe and the rise of the industrial powers colonized the rest of the world, or much of the rest of the world, and even where they didn't colonize them, they essentially had the economic power, the military power, the science and technology. And so what you had was what we call a bisected world, a world split into two. Industrial, second wave on top, first wave on the bottom. What is now happening is the most fundamental change in power relationships on the planet since the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment. And I believe what we're moving toward is a world power system which is not bisected, but trisected, cut into three. We're going to see countries that whose people continue to live by the plow, who live agrarian lives, who produce products, food for themselves, perhaps for export, but who live still very close to the earth in very poor conditions. At least for decades, I think we're going to continue to see some societies, some countries at that living that kind of a life. We call that first wave civilization. Then there are countries who have gotten into the assembly line era. They're early industrial powers themselves. These are the Bangladeshis. These are some of the Caribbean islands. These are the places, this is northern Mexico, in part. These are places that essentially are selling cheap labor to the outside world, and they are becoming what the advanced economies are leaving behind. And then you have the third wave countries that I mentioned before, the United States, Southeast Asia, Japan, parts of China, parts of Brazil, little parts of Mexico, parts of Europe, that these form a third wave civilization. And the people in these cultures, it's not just economies, it's an economy with a culture that comes with it, and a certain social forms and communication methods and even language that comes together in a package. These people have more in common with each other than they do with their own peasants. They have more in common with each other than they do with their own factory workers. And therefore, I believe that what we're going to see is, for a period of time, the world is going to go from bisected to trisected into three types of civilization in conflict. And there are two things further to be said about that. One is that the countries that are now most developed in terms of high technology and economic sophistication and advanced economies are not going to be able to monopolize their technologies. The forces of capitalism itself drive them to put factories in other countries. And when they do that, they proliferate their technologies. For a period of time, this will happen. After a while, they will get so smart, their factories will become so advanced that they don't need the cheap labor anymore. Japan, I spoke with Morita Akio, who was the man who co-founded Sony, as you know, and he was saying, we're going to bring factories back from Asia because it is better to produce a product with a small number of highly paid, highly skilled workers than to have a lot of cheap labor in another country. They don't produce as well. The highly paid workers with high technology will produce better products, higher quality, faster, and cheaper than factories that are based on manual labor. So for a period of time, there's going to be a proliferation of third wave technologies around the world, but gradually the rapidly advanced, the most advanced economies are going to begin to say, we don't need that cheap labor out there anymore. We're going to bring that work back home. However, they have their own internal conflicts over unemployment and social dislocation and racism and all the difficulties that we know. So basically, I believe we're going to see the world split into three, and each country itself increasingly split into two or three along these lines. The division between first, second, and third wave societies or ways of life will be global and also internal within various countries.
What would power mean in the 21st century?
Well, I don't know what power would mean, but I think I know what will give power. And what will give power is appropriate knowledge. Look at it this way. There are three sources of power on the planet. There are three ways that people can make other people do what they want, or countries can make other countries do what they want. The first is force, violence. With a gun, you can force somebody to do what you want. It's pretty primitive. It's very unsophisticated. But the fact is, you can make somebody behave the way you want them to for a limited period of time by threatening violence or applying violence. The second source of power is much more flexible, and it's money. With economic power, with economic resources, you can not only punish somebody, which is what violence does, you can reward them. And so you have a tool for power that is much more flexible. And economic power is a higher quality of power than violence power. Now, the revolution that's now happening on the world, which is changing the nature or the meaning of power, as you put it, is that the economy is now dependent upon knowledge power. Francis Bacon said knowledge is power, but he couldn't imagine that the entire economy would be based on knowledge. And that is where we're going. And military power is based on knowledge and information. So the two earlier sources, or less flexible sources of power are now themselves dependent upon knowledge, which is the most versatile form of power of all. If I have the right knowledge, I don't have to even compel you to do what I want. I can convince you it was your idea. So knowledge, and that takes us to a new way of thinking about the global system, and I think about peace, because otherwise, if we have trade blocks and if we allow the present violence, religious, ethnic, cultural violence to escalate, as we did in Bosnia and the Balkans, I think Europe and the United States were disgusting in the way they did not act on this crisis until so many people were destroyed.
So tell us, how can war be prevented?
Well, you know, after the Berlin Wall came down, there was this gigantic wave of ecstasy all over the world, thinking, well, now peace is going to break out all over. This was extremely naive. Peace is not going to break out all over. We're moving into a period of great turbulence and great instability, and I believe a great deal of conflict. In fact, on average, between the end of World War II in 1945 or 6 and 1990, there were in any year 30 wars going on around the planet, somewhere. In the last year, that has jumped to 62. And we're going to see more conflict, not less. So the question is, what can we do if we can't completely eliminate war? What can be done to reduce its scope, to make it less violent, to try to anticipate and prevent? And the one weapon that we have not thought of using is our brain. And let me give you an example. The entire Balkan tragedy of the last 2 years can be traced to the collapse of communism in Yugoslavia and the demagogic, hypocritical nationalism adopted by Milosevic in Serbia and some other leaders who said, well, we can't get elected by selling communism, so we will sell nationalist hatred of others. And indeed, the intellectuals played a very, very disgusting role in these countries. They wrote speeches, they wrote articles calling for nationalist revenge, for taking away the homes of people of a different ethnic background and so forth. But how did the leaders do it? They did it with the television camera. They had total control of television in Serbia, for example. People in the society who did not want to fight, who were against war, the peace people, the moderate people, had no access to that communication. And now the entire debate about what should be done by the outside world was, should we send ground troops? No, that would be like Vietnam. Should we use airstrikes? Well, they might not work because, after all, we have some British soldiers there and French, so we might hurt our own people. Now, with the Russians coming in, this is an impossibility, in all likelihood. Or should we lift the arms embargo for the Muslims in Bosnia because they have been unfairly treated? Nobody has said, no, lift the information embargo. Crack Milosevic's control of that tube. In the future, if we want to prevent war, we're going to have something like a United Nations rapid reaction media force. And here's what could have been done. It's late now. Even if you did it now, it would not stop the war. But it could have been done. It would be possible to have said to Milosevic, or to all of these bloody leaders, if you don't stop, we're going to take your voice away from you. We're going to jam your television set, and we're going to introduce NHK, CNN, BBC, news from around the world so your people know what's going on, and we're going to invite moderates and peace people from your own society and give them access to the media, and we're going to let them talk to your population over your head.
Alvin Toffler, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
En Londres, Silvia Lemus.